places that ended up in a huge killing and a messy situation. Uganda still has not recovered from what happened down there, and you're still getting a total mess in that country regarding what was occurred there. And Nigeria, another country, where there's a huge civil war between the Biafrans and the Christians and the Muslims, and that's a place where the British had mandates too. So, you know, the British are good people, mean well, but they're actually cause a lot of trouble with their manipulating maps. Iraq's a place they manipulated maps, and Americans and Iraqis are paying the price at the moment, a lot of other people. But the Kurds have paid the biggest price, because what happened way back at the time of the League of Nations is Kurdish nationalism was denied by everybody, even though there's a huge amount of Kurds. And the Turks cut off a huge chunk after World War I and made it Turkey, but that included in the eastern parts of Turkey huge chunks of Kurdish areas. We're only learning that Kurds even exist in the last 3 years. I'm sure if you asked the average American who a Kurd was 4 years ago, they said, what? Isn't that something that you get out of butter? They wouldn't have had any idea there was such a thing as a Kurd. Well, the Kurds, the Turks like to call them Mountain Turks, so they're not Mountain Turks. It's just a euphemism so they don't have to give up the area that the Kurds inhabit, which is all of southeastern Turkey. Yeah, all of southeastern Turkey. And then western Iran is also Kurdish. And northeastern Syria is Kurdish. And northern Iraq is Kurdish. So their national rights were totally disregarded, and it was all because of oil. For the Iraq was all because of oil, because the oil in the north was mainly in Kurdish territories. And that's the problem today. That's why they don't want to have a federalized Iraq. That's why they don't want to approve the Constitution. That's why the Kurds are all being stubborn. They don't want to give up the semi-independence they have. That's why the Shiites are now saying we want our autonomous regions. That's why the Sunnis are saying we don't want these places to have the autonomous regions because they'll control all of the oil and we won't get any. And it's true that Central area where you mostly have Sunnis don't have the oil resources and so on. So all these problems are built in from the beginning. But again, my mind is in the Versailles Peace Conference, the Kurds were totally left out. The British refused to recognize their rights, created this Iraq, used the Sunni minority to rule all the others, and that's how they administered the country. And we're paying the price now for better or for worse. Why'd you get involved anyway? Well, the extremist Muslims say, well, you let us take care of it. We would take care of the whole thing. We just make everyone extremist Muslims like ourselves. Well, that's true too. But that would be done under force in the sense that if you don't do it our way, you could be treated quite harshly. So that doesn't mean that's what the average person wants necessarily. It certainly isn't what the average Kurd wants. And so on. The Iraqis were very modern in many areas, and many were westernized to try to make them go back to a medieval Islamic situation. May seem attractive to a believing person like an evangelical or a fundamentalist person here. That may seem like the right thing to do to America too. But there are many people in America who would object to going back to an evangelical fundamentalist position, the same as they would be in those countries. But if you do it under threat, if you have a system where, in fact, if you don't do it, you can be treated harshly, then you're in a different world. So it's not such an easy thing, and there are people who come at it from all sides. But to my mind, if the Kurdish problem had been properly addressed from the beginning, a lot of this would never have happened and been solved. But that's water over the dam. And the Kurdish problem is still not going to be addressed properly because Iran, Turkey, and Syria will not want it to be addressed properly, nor will the Saudis want it to be addressed properly, because we'll leave their compatriots, the Sunnis, without oil and without wealth and so on. And so the Kurds are still going to be, excuse the expression, given the shaft as much as possible by everybody. But the Kurds are Muslims too. So if you're a Muslim, you have not much right to say, well, the Kurds shouldn't have their position too. This has to do with Arab Islam versus pan-Islam versus pan-Muslim versus pan-Arabism. Let's go back to our beginning point. Now you see how complicated this all is. Why do we start with the Arabs? Because the Arabs are the people out of whom most people think Islam sprung. And that's true. So when we want to get some information about what most Muslims know or believe, we have to go back to the Arabs. Because whether you like it or admit it or care about it or not, Muhammad was an Arabian prophet, and he makes no bones about that. He basically calls himself a warner to the Arabian people. So first of all, we have to do, even if we come from Indonesia, even if we come from Pakistan, even if we come from many other areas of the Muslim world, Nigeria or wherever, everyone will know the Arab roots of Islam. So the Arabs have that claim, and they have that right to be acknowledged as the bringers of Islam to the rest of the Muslims. That Muhammad was born as part of the Arab nation, if you can call it as such. So in order to decide the Arab nation, who is an Arab? First of all, you have to say, well, what is an Arab? Who is an Arab? Who were the first Arabs? And that's where Nicholson can help us. He goes into those things a bit. So we can look in classical sources and say, well, who and what are Arabs? When are they first mentioned? I think, I'm not totally sure because my mind's a little hazy, but in the Bible, I think you have the first mention in the Bible somewhere in the 8th century BC. You know, the Bible is a book of, I'm talking about the Hebrew Old Testament now, not the New Testament, obviously, which is written in the AD, CE, whatever, you know, after Christ period, whenever you think it was written, first, second, or third centuries after Christ, put in its final form at the conferences under the Roman Empire in the 300s. So we don't know when everything was written in the New Testament, as it were. But the Old Testament, basically, the Hebrew Bible is going to call that, hit its. We have a Hebrew Bible class, by the way, Wednesday evening, if you're interested. I teach that too. Basically hit its form in which we now have it. Most of the books were written in the 5th century BC, by the time of the 5th century BC. One or two books that are in the Christian Bible, but funnily enough are not in the Jewish Bible, the version of the Old Testament of the Christian Jews, were written in the 2nd century BC. And there's a lot of controversy about one of the most famous books of the Old Testament called the Book of Daniel. And the Book of Daniel, Jews to this day don't like to, I'm running all over the place to pick up the backgrounds of everyone. There's no straight line to develop knowledge. Try to get everyone, lift up the cultural background of everyone, so therefore you all start to, you know, suppose you're a Muslim in the class, you've never heard this, or a Christian in the class, or Jewish, or Buddhist, or whatever, you may not have heard aspects of what I'm talking about.